Something big is happening in Africa. Since 2020, there's been this wave of military takeovers sweeping across a huge part of the continent, toppling one government after another. People are calling it a domino effect, or a coup contagion. So the big question is, why? Why is all of this happening right now? To really get it, we need to look at how these dominoes started to fall.
Okay, just look at this timeline. This isn't random. It starts in Mali in 2020, and then the pace just picks up. It creates what people are now calling the Coup Belt, and it slices right through the heart of West and Central Africa. In less than 4 years, we're talking about at least 7 nations where the government was overthrown. This is not just a bunch of isolated incidents. It's more like a regional earthquake, and the aftershocks are literally reshaping the continent.
So what's really driving all this? What are the forces at play here? Is this a flat-out rejection of democracy? Is it a fight for some kind of true final independence? Or is it something else entirely? To figure that out, we've got to look at what's going on inside these countries and also what's happening from the outside.
All right, so let's start our investigation by looking inward. Because before any military can just roll in and take over, the ground has to be, fertile for it. And in a lot of these nations, the civilian governments were just hemorrhaging trust with their own people, creating these deep, deep cracks in the very foundation of the state. Now, what's fascinating here is how all 4 of these points just feed on each other. You have sources pointing to this really deep popular anger with the elites, who are seen as just getting rich while the country goes nowhere. And you can imagine, right, when people feel like their leaders are building mansions in Paris while they can't get basic security or services at home, that trust just evaporates. It creates a massive opening for anyone who comes along promising to burn it all down and start over.
And that security crisis, it is absolutely staggering. Just think about this for a second. Nearly half of all global terrorism deaths in 2022 happened right here in the Sahel. The civilian governments, even with a lot of foreign help, were simply failing to protect their citizens from horrific extremist violence. And when a state can't provide that basic, fundamental function, safety, its entire reason for being is on the line.
Okay, so we've seen the internal problems, the failures from within. But now, let's peel back the next layer of this thing, because these nations, they don't exist in a bubble. They all share this really complex, really charged history that's created a kind of post-colonial powder keg, just waiting for a spark.
And this right here is a critical clue. Every single one of these countries in the Coup Belt is a former French colony. That is not a coincidence. In fact, it's absolutely central to understanding the anti-establishment anger we're seeing bubble up on the streets. This shared history has created a long and now very tense relationship with Paris.
And this is really where the story gets complicated, because you have 2 totally different realities playing out at the same time. On one hand, France sees itself as a partner, fighting terrorism, providing aid, upholding democracy. But on the ground, the perception has shifted dramatically. The same French troops that were welcomed as an army of liberation back in 2013 are now widely seen as an army of occupation that's just propping up unpopular, corrupt governments and exploiting resources. This anti-French feeling has become an incredibly powerful rallying cry for these new military hunters.
So, with France's influence on the decline, a huge power vacuum is opening up. And in the world of geopolitics, a vacuum never, ever stays empty for long. All that resentment we were just talking about has basically swung the door wide open for new global players to step onto the stage, and it's signaling a massive geopolitical shift.
And you can see it happening. The source material describes these incredible scenes. During protests against France and the old establishment, you don't just see the national flags of these countries. You see Russian flags being waved everywhere. For a lot of people on the ground, Russia is seen as this powerful alternative, a leader who's willing to stand up to the West and offer a totally different path forward. And this really breaks down why that alternative looks so good to them. First, Russia doesn't have any of the colonial baggage in the region that France does. And second, it offers military support, often through mercenary groups like Wagner, with, and this is the key, no strings attached. There are no lectures about democracy, no scolding about human rights. For a brand new military government that's desperate for security and some legitimacy, that's a very, very attractive deal. A deal that's often paid for with access to the nation's gold or uranium or other mineral wealth.
So we've looked at the internal decay, the ghosts of the colonial past, and this new geopolitical chessboard. All these pieces are now in motion, and they're moving fast. But where does this all actually lead? And that's maybe the hardest question of all. What comes next? What is the future for democracy on the continent?
One African leader in our source material puts out this really provocative idea. He says a bad coup is just a reckless power grab. But a good coup, he argues, could actually be a justified last resort, especially when a civilian government is corrupt, stealing from its people, and refusing to leave power. But, and this is a huge but, he adds a crucial condition. The new leaders have to actually deliver positive change. And that right there is the billion-dollar question hanging over the Coup Belt today. Can these new military leaders actually govern any better than the people they replaced?
And it's also really important to realize that while the whole world is focused on these military coups, they aren't the only threat to democracy in the region. Some leaders are pulling off what's called a constitutional coup. They don't need tanks rolling through the streets when they can just rewrite the laws to stay in power forever, like we saw in Guinea with the whole push for a third term. Or when they use the machinery of the state to crush any opposition, which is what critics say is happening in Tanzania. It's just a reminder that this challenge is way broader and more complex than just soldiers in the capital.
So, all of this brings us back to the fundamental question at the absolute heart of this entire story. Is this wave of coups a genuine popular uprising against a completely failed system, maybe a final, messy, painful step in decolonization? Or are these nations simply trading one set of problems, like corrupt civilian rule, for a brand new set of chains, unaccountable military juntas backed by new foreign powers? That is the unwritten question, and the future of millions of people hangs on the answer.